Hi there. Welcome to another edition of the Israel-Palestine Report. So today we have some amazing news. Edan Alexander, the IDF hostage, was released today. His health seems to be um, not great, but he was walking on his own accord. Now, the release of the soldier is incredibly significant and could mark a complete turning point in this war. In fact, I believe it will um, mark a turning point because it's part of a wider deal. Israel is denying there's any quid pro quo for this release. And from its perspective, that's probably true. But that's a very bad sign for Israel because the quid pro quo is occurring behind its back or over its head. This is part of a larger deal between the United States and the Gulf states, not between Israel, not between Hamas, between the United States and the Gulf states. And that's the way to look at some of the weird things that have been going on lately, like that 400 uh, million-dollar plane that has been received, like the massive amounts of investment the United States is going to be receiving from Saudi Arabia and from Qatar. This is part of a wider deal. The United States and Trump personally will get a lot of money. And in return, the Gulf states will receive all sorts of political benefits, like in Saudi Arabia's case, a nuclear program, at first a civil nuclear program, but one that's easily translatable into a military one, and the end to the war in Gaza. That's where I believe this is going, and that's what I'm hearing from a lot of sources and seeing from a lot of the reporters that I trust the most. So, what are we talking about here? Let's give something of an overview here. So today, Dan Alexander was released. He refused to meet Netanyahu. Instead, he held up a placard that thanked Trump for his release. That's very significant because Netanyahu not only had nothing to do with his release, but even objected to his release when this move started a month ago. Um, Another sign of what's happening here is that there was no release ceremony. Hamas didn't have the sort of humiliating release ceremony like they had in the past. And that's because they didn't want to embarrass the Saudis and the Qataris that had brokered this, and they want to build trust with the Trump administration. So, along with the ties that are emerging between Trump and Qatar and the UAE and Saudi Arabia, there's also direct talks between Trump and Hamas, which led to this. And Hamas doesn't want to disturb this by having that kind of um, of a ceremony. Um, as part of the quid pro quo for this release, Witkoff demanded that Netanyahu send a delegation to Doha for a few days. Those days are crucial because those days are leading up to Trump's visit to the Gulf states. And we know that Trump said that he's planning a very dramatic declaration there. And it's looking increasingly likely that what he wants is to announce the end of the war. And that is why Witkoff is basically forcing Netanyahu to send his people to Doha to negotiate. Another part of this deal has been the renewal of aid. Israel's pretending that the renewal of aid in Gaza that's happening right now, that preparations for it are happening right now, is not linked to the release of Alexander or to the end of the war. An Israeli official told Ynet, the goal is for it to be only in southern Gaza. Their food will be delivered, hospitals and tent cities set up. We want to move all of Gaza's population there so they get aid and can't move back north. That's the aim. It will take time. Until then, we need a bridge because soon Gaza could be at risk of starvation, which isn't in our interest. End quote. He also added, until the South is ready, Israel will have to provide basic aid to those in northern Gaza. We're preparing for that, but only if we're sure there's no choice and they face starvation. It's not connected to Alexander's release. Distribution zones will be set up in areas we've captured and cleared temporarily until we move people south. The goal is to strip Hamas of its governing abilities because taking that away is 90% of the job. So the official Israeli line right now is that soon the IDF will launch the operation. It's called Gideon's Chariots, which will be an operation to clear the entire population of Gaza into the south, put them into what essentially are concentration camps, and then begin the process of removing them to other countries or ethnically cleansing them to other countries. I think that with the new developments, that's very unlikely to occur. An operation like that will take months, will involve a lot of war crimes, will put a lot of stress on Qatar, UAE, Saudi Arabia, and that's exactly what they're trying to avoid. And the reason they provided um, Trump with all of these benefits is because they want to stop that from occurring. So the Israeli delegation in Doha, and that's really what we need to pay attention to, is going to stay there until Thursday. And that's what that's what Witkoff and Netanyahu agreed on. The delegation is being headed by Deputy Head of the Shin Bet, the hostage coordinator Gal Hirsch, Netanyahu's political advisor Ophir Falk, and representatives from the Mossad and military intelligence. Netanyahu accompanied their leaving with a threat. He said, quote, "In a few days, things will happen in Gaza, things you haven't seen before," end quote. But I'm not sure if he actually believes that will happen. Even if he does, it seems very unlikely. An Israeli official said that the reason that Hamas has agreed to release Alexander is, quote, "because they're afraid of Gideon's chariots. That's the only reason. A last attempt to prevent the operation. If they see we're determined and the Americans are with us, that could have an effect. There are no gaps between us and the Americans." But American officials have insisted to several sources, to the Wall Street Journal, to the Washington Post, and to Haaretz, that the U.S. will not allow Netanyahu off the hook, that they insist on ending the war. And I trust those sources a lot more than I trust Netanyahu's sources. Netanyahu is flailing right now to survive politically. Um, he created a close bond with Trump, or thought he had created a close bond with Trump, because he thought that that was the one thing that would protect him in power. And now that that's eroding, he is out of options on what to do next. People have recently spoken to Trump, say that he's determined to exploit the momentum of Alexander's release and Trump's arrival in Saudi Arabia to bring Netanyahu to a point of no choice and to push forward a deal. In the meantime, Witkoff is proposing a ceasefire that would last 40 days. In that time, there would be negotiations on the move between phase one and phase two. If you remember, phase two was talk about ending the war and releasing the hostages that remain, the 58 hostages that now remain in Gaza. The American assumption here, and I believe they're correct, is that Netanyahu cannot afford open feud with Trump with all the baggage that comes with. Netanyahu already knows that it's coming. That's why he made some very interesting comments in the Committee for Foreign Policy and Security. He said that Israel will have to detox itself from American aid, which means that he has reason to believe that Trump will at least threaten to stop aid unless the war stops. Considering how unpopular the war is in Israel right now, only about 25% of the population, 35 at most, support the continuation of the war. The idea of stopping aid um, would undermine the entire operation. How many people are going to support Israel continuing a war that absolutely no one in the world supports, that could see sanctions, an end of aid to the country, and of course all the hostages being killed? That's something that Netanyahu will have a lot of difficulty getting the country to agree to. So over those 40 days of negotiation that Witkoff will almost certainly force on Israel, a senior Israeli official said, quote, "We hope to enter effective negotiations aimed at releasing the hostages. We insist on freeing half the hostages now, not in stages, and the other half with an agreement." So that already shows, and this is an official said this to Ynet, that already shows that the Israeli officials are being more willing to compromise than they were before. And it shows a realization that Israel is going to have to cave on the end of the war. So they're already discussing the terms. I think half the hostages before, half the hostages after is something that Hamas would be willing to do, especially if Qatar put a lot of pressure on them to do it. The truth is, Israel has very little control of this situation. The future of Gaza is being worked out by Trump and the Gulf states directly. They provided Trump with money, they provided Trump with benefits, and Israel cannot even begin to match the what they've given him. Hamas released a statement as well. Quote, "We're ready to enter immediate negotiations for a comprehensive deal. Continued aggression will prolong the suffering of the hostages and could even kill them. Continue your efforts to end the war," they said to Trump. So this really undermines um, Netanyahu's strategy. Until now, his tactic was to overload the process with demands so Hamas would refuse. Then he could blame the group for blowing up the negotiations. But now that Qatar and the United States are coordinated completely in their negotiation strategy, it's not going to continue to work. A source from one of the Gulf states told Haaretz, quote, "Everyone understands the negotiations in Doha will be very short, and the Americans will push for agreements. No one wants to be the side the U.S. blames for violating the deal." And that is exactly what's going to happen here. There's going to be a deal that's completely coordinated that Hamas are on board with because Hamas and Qatar are so close. It'll be presented to Netanyahu as take it or leave it. And then Netanyahu will have to go completely against Trump, an open break with Trump, something that will undermine his ability to control his own base, his own party. It's something that I don't think he will be able to do. I believe that even though Netanyahu is going to go into this kicking and screaming, this process will end the war. And I certainly hope that I'm correct because it has to end. The horror that's going on in Gaza has to end. The rest of the hostages have to come home. Okay, if you like what I do here, consider supporting me on Patreon, consider subscribing to my Substack, consider listening to my History of the Land of Israel podcast, and I'll be back here very soon.